To understand the setting of this story a bit better, I'm going to provide some context first. This took place after I graduated high school and moved away from my family. I moved up to Alaska again, and I say again because I lived there before and attended college there. At the time, conveniently, my mother had been renting out our old house instead of selling it. I say conveniently because the long-standing residents had moved away, and therefore I was awarded the old house. I had to work quite a bit to keep up the payments, but my mother pitched in. It should also be made aware that I had recently broken up with the girl who had been staying with me in the old house I was renting through my mother, and this breakup was unclean and dysfunctional, much like the relationship itself was. Now to the story. It was winter break, which meant I would be spending more time inside than I normally would. It was somewhat lonely in the house, especially being newly single. Also, there are no neighbors really to speak of, as the house was in an extremely wooded region a few miles out of town. One late afternoon, soon after I thought the whole breakup predicament had come to a close, I was made quite aware that it wasn't. My cell phone began ringing from an unknown number, and I decided to pick it up. It was, of course, my ex. She began telling me about how great her new boyfriend is, and how horrible I was and am, the sort of talk that you can almost smell the booze off the caller's breath from miles away. I actually listened until she decided to hand the phone to her new boyfriend, where he was instead sounding oddly threatening, and I decided to hang up in the most polite manner possible with a "have a good day." Days later, again with my mind beginning to forget, I was laying on the living room couch watching some TV. While laying there, I noticed something extremely unsettling. A person was standing in the window behind me. I could see them through the reflection of the TV screen. I didn't move an inch. I had no gun, I had no knife, I had nothing but my wit and my fists. I just lay there, watching the reflection. Eventually, it moved away from the window. Normally, that would certainly be creepy for anyone to witness, but for me, it was much worse. I was taking into account that the house was nowhere near another, so that was an immediate red flag. If someone was just wanting to talk, they'd knock. I was most certain that it was that boyfriend of hers. Nothing became of that situation, but similar situations continued, such as a car pulling into the driveway and no one getting out, and then leaving inconspicuously. A few days later, I was laying in bed at night. It was getting late and I was getting ready to sleep. I got another call from an unknown number. It was her, but this time, she was asking me to come outside and come see her because she wanted to deliver an apology. Annoyed, but ready to settle this once and for all, I decided to go outside. I opened the door, and of course it was incredibly dark. I didn't see anyone, so I said into the phone, "I'm outside." She responded, "Come around back." With this, I began to walk on the snow-covered ground in the darkness in my boots. The motion light turned on as I crossed the garage and the driveway. The snow masking the ground was tinted yellow by the light. I rounded the corner of the garage and turned my phone to see. There was a road that runs behind my house and connected to the driveway by bending, and I made my way towards the road. There was a part in the trees that allowed me to walk straight to the road, so I cut through the path. I then asked into the phone, "Where are you?" "I'm in the car, I see you." I stepped onto the road and saw her car parked a few dozen feet away from me with the lights dimmed. "So, what's the deal?" "I just want to talk. Come here." I approached the car and made my way around to the passenger side, and I finally saw her face. She waved me in, and I opened the door and sat down in the car. I looked at her and she said, "Look, I'm sorry. I know I've been a real jerk lately." Then, of course, she abruptly stopped speaking because car lights started shining behind us. Naturally, I assumed it was her boyfriend, and by the look on her face, she did too. The car parked behind us, and sure enough, the boyfriend got out and stormed over to my side of the car. He yanked on the door handle, and the door swung open, and he attempted to grab me, but I grabbed his wrist and got out of the car. He was completely livid, screaming a bunch of nonsense to me, making false accusations about why I was with her, and a ton of insults. I tried explaining the situation to him, but it was like talking to an angry wall. He gave me this look of utter enragement before swinging at me and, of course, missing. A little scuffle ensued, and all that happened was him swearing and eventually slipping and falling before yelling that he was going to kill both of us. I just stood by her car as he pulled away. She gave me a lift back to the house, and she was scared that he'd try to attack her next. She ended up sleeping in the guest bedroom in my house before I woke up hours later. There was a banging at the back door, and I knew this because the back door was directly below my room. She came into my room with an awful look on her face. I stood up quickly and went to my closet, then grabbed my Louisville Slugger. She was sitting upright in her bed with her hands embarrassingly covering her eyes. I didn't say anything before walking down the stairs slowly, attempting to be silent. The lights were off, and there were no windows on the staircase, and the banging on the back door had audibly ceased. I held the bat tightly, making sure it didn't bang into the wall to signal my position at the time. I remember how slowly I stepped down, especially on the bottom 3 steps, which were always the creakiest. Once I reached the last step, I froze, and it still gives me chills to this day. The hardwood floors creak around the bottom of the staircase, and there was a creaking that was growing closer and closer. I raised the bat above my head, ready to slam whoever it was right on the top of the head. The creaking grew closer until I could hear it from my side, and I planned to swing as soon as it was in front of me. I listened ever so carefully, holding my breath. The creaking was just feet away, and I squeezed my hands tighter than I ever had before around the bat, waiting to swing. This time, they were directly in front of me, and I slammed the bat down hard. I hit something, and whatever it was crumpled to the floor with a bang and a loud crack. I turned on the light, and there he was, the boyfriend. He had shot his gun directly at the floor and left a hole in the hardwood floor. My ex came down the stairs and was crying profusely, muttering, "I'm so sorry," over and over. I called the local police station, and 4 cop cars pulled into my driveway along with an ambulance in a matter of minutes. I sat there at the base of the stairs, watching the boyfriend. He was breathing. I could tell from his chest slowly inclining and declining off the floor. I had grabbed what I think was a 9mm off the floor and kept it in my hand with the safety turned on, and I just shook my head over and over in utter disbelief. I explained the situation to the police as the paramedics rushed in and carried him out on a stretcher. All in all, I didn't get to sleep until the afternoon the next day, after all the stuff had been finished. He ended up actually being induced into a coma and eventually recovered, but a restraining order had already been filed in advance. I never ended up moving though. I had considered it heavily, but nothing has ever happened since. This happened a few years ago when my father was still alive, but I'd be lying if I said it still doesn't creep me out to this day. When my father got sick, he refused to go to a nursing home, in addition to not taking medications prescribed by his doctor that without a doubt would have extended his life. I live on the opposite side of the country now, but he never left my childhood home in Alaska. I've never been a fan of negative 30-degree temperatures, but it never seemed to bother my father. Once I was told that he only had about 2 months to live, I decided to go out there and live with him in his final days. The house is pretty far off the beaten path, which isn't saying much considering that's practically the entire state, but the nearest town was about 20 minutes away by car. Anyways, I arrived in the middle of January, and I moved myself in for the time being. Not having to work while I was there, I spent a lot of time exploring my hometown and catching up with a few long-lost friends. A couple weeks after being there, we started getting hit with huge snowstorms, almost to the point that it was nearly impossible to open up the front door in the mornings. The old snowplow we had barely worked with the amount of snow we were getting, so I'd spend at least 3 to 4 hours a day shoveling the half-mile-long driveway so I'd be able to get my car out. Well, on one of these days, I had just finished clearing off the driveway. It was around 1 in the afternoon. We were in need of groceries, so I made a trip into town and ran a few other errands. While I was out, I got a call from my father. "Are you home?" "No, I'm still out shopping. Why?" I said. "Then who's here?" Aside from a multitude of medical issues he was dealing with, he also had pretty bad dementia, so that didn't automatically send me into a panic. He'd often get confused, misplace things, just typical problems that come from living with dementia. With this in mind, I pretty much shrugged it off and told him I'd be home soon, then went back to whatever it was I was doing in that moment. Looking back now, I wish I had taken his call seriously. I arrived back home about an hour later. It was about 4 p.m., so there was plenty of visibility despite the constant snow. As I pulled up to the house, I noticed footsteps circling the entire front end of the house. I knew for a fact that they weren't mine, and I had a hard time believing it was my father's, but I decided to play it safe. My father was a big hunter back in the day, so I immediately grabbed one of his old rifles out of the garage and did a quick scan around the outside of the house. I followed the footsteps, and they circled the house multiple times, unless there were multiple people walking together. Regardless, this was enough to cause actual concern. I followed the footsteps to the front door where they stopped. The door was locked, just like I left it, so I grabbed the house key and went inside. I immediately called out to my father, who was in his room watching TV. I asked him what exactly happened earlier when he called me, but he had no recollection, which was obviously frustrating. I asked him if he remembered going outside at any point, and he said no, but that didn't necessarily mean he didn't. After explaining myself as to why I was holding the rifle, I checked the entire inside of the house. Nothing was out of place. I shrugged it off and assumed it must have been my father, but I did sleep with the rifle that night just in case. Well, another week passed, and nothing else happened, until I was sound asleep in the middle of the night on a Saturday night. I slept on the first floor across the hall from my father, just in case he needed anything in the middle of the night. I woke up to the sound of something rattling. It took me a few seconds to get my bearings, but it didn't take me long to realize that it was the front door. I grabbed my rifle and quietly peeked into my father's room, hoping it was him wandering around. When I saw him sound asleep in his bed, my heart sank. Someone was trying to break inside the house. I made my way down the hallway towards the front door and was instantly hit with a cold draft of air. The front door was wide open. I flipped on the porch light and noticed what looked to be multiple sets of footprints. I'm not sure how many exactly, but I was able to make out at least 2 different prints in the snow. Not knowing whether they were inside the house or outside, I went straight to my father's room, woke him up, and brought him out to my car while I called the police. Obviously being shaken up, I drove a few miles down the road and waited for the cops to arrive. They searched the entire house, but it came up empty. However, they did find wet footprints leading through the entrance to the basement of the house, in addition to footprints in the snow leading away from our house into the woods in the backyard. If that wasn't creepy enough, I learned that whoever entered the house did not actually break in, but rather used a key to unlock the front door. I know for a fact that every door leading into the house was always locked, especially after the first encounter I had with the footprints and then the strange call from my dad. I still to this day have no idea how someone would have acquired a key to the house. I know my father had a couple spares, but they were all accounted for when the police searched the house. I did, however, have every lock to the house replaced because someone was clearly able to enter and leave as they pleased. I have no guess as to who it might have been. We don't really have any neighbors nearby, and the house is as secluded as it gets. As anticlimactic as this may all sound, I'm still really freaked out, because unless that was their first time entering the house, this could have been going on for much longer than I thought. And with my father's dementia, he may have already had some sort of encounter with them and just didn't remember. He died last year, and the house is now in my name, but I'm still scared to go back there, especially alone. For context, I was 26 at the time of this happening, and I'm a female. I was out late on my way home from work on a Saturday night around 11 p.m. when I needed to get gas. I pulled into a gas station that was usually pretty busy, but it was completely bare, not a car in sight. I also live in Alaska, so as you can imagine, it was very cold on this night, about -10. Usually being tired after work and just wanting to get home, I usually start my pump and sit in my car due to the freezing cold, but this time, I had a weird feeling that I needed to stand by the pump, so I did. I had just started pumping my gas when a golden sedan pulled up right next to me. A guy got out, and for some reason, I was very hypervigilant of this. I watched as he started cleaning his already clean windows, which definitely caught my full attention. As soon as he put the squeegee back, he started heading directly towards me. I felt like I wanted to run, but I stayed calm and continued pumping. Once he was just a few feet away, he asked me if I would help him put windshield wiper fluid in his car, claiming that he ran out and didn't know how to open the hood. I laughed it off and told him I didn't know either, which was obviously a lie. However, he kept getting closer and closer to me while trying to lure me into his car, saying that there was something under his seat that he couldn't reach because he was too big. Now, I'm 5'2" and petite, and this man was large and scruffy, definitely some sort of Alaskan wilderness dude. At this point, I was freaking out, so I hit the call button on the pump. As I did that, he took a step back and started to go back to his car. I thought I was being smart, plus my gas was almost done. As he was walking back, I glanced over at his car and noticed that the driver's side door and back seat door were both wide open. When I looked closer, I felt my heart stop in my chest. Except for the driver's side door, none of the doors from inside the car had handles. I quickly turned around, put the pump back, and fumbled around trying to get the gas nozzle shut. As soon as I turned around, he was right behind me. I was completely petrified. Before I could even move, he grabbed my arm and slammed me against my car. Out of pure adrenaline and instinct, I elbowed him as hard as I could in the face. I started to scream at the top of my lungs, and thank God for the gas attendant, who came charging out with a gun, because if not for him, I don't know what would have happened. The attendant pulled the security video, and we made a police report. Nothing ever came of that footage, and I have no idea where he went or where he is now. I just hope he already hasn't targeted another girl.